So we're now moving on to item 7.2, which is Don McLean, respecting item 8.2, the priority focus areas for the Office of the Climate Change Initiatives, PED 23064. This is a virtual presentation. Good morning, Mr. McLean. How are you, sir?
Good morning, Deputy Mayor Clark, and I'm doing well, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I guess it's sort of de rigueur for me to show up whenever there's something about climate on the agenda, and there is something very definitely about climate on the agenda this morning in the report from the new Climate Change Office.
We're always happy to have you, sir. So when you begin your presentation, I'll begin timing you for 5 minutes.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
I can begin. I don't have any visuals. I'm just going to chat a bit here about what I'm seeing in the report and a concern that I have that is not being well addressed, I think, in the report. So if I can proceed?
Yes, you can, sir.
Okay. It is certainly a positive step to see what we are being presented with this morning, and something that we've been looking for a long time in Hamilton to see financial commitments to taking action on climate. Reviewing the report, it appears to be not surprising and generally in the direction that I would have expected. But of course, it still doesn't fully reflect or doesn't really very seriously reflect the urgency of the situation. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reported last week, I guess, the situation, final report from the AR6 report, and the UN Secretary General noted that reiterated that the emissions cut must be by 50% by 2030. So I think we can legitimately ask, will Hamilton achieve this? And he says the climate time bomb is ticking. The rate of temperature rise in the last half century is the highest in 2,000 years. Concentrations of carbon dioxide are at their highest in at least 2 million years. So the issue of what we're doing about emissions is critical and crucial. And I realize that in terms of the way we calculate emissions, much of them in Hamilton are coming from industry and specifically from the steel industry. And there is some hope that there will be some change in that by the end of this decade. But I would suggest that it's unwise of the council to look at that and say, okay, we're going to make the 50% cut by 2030. We need to be focusing on the things which council can actually do something directly about, and the steel industry is generally not something that we have much control over. So if you look at the overall numbers in Hamilton, by far the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Hamilton is from fossil gas, called by some people natural gas, but it's really actually methane. Over 90% of what is sold as natural gas is methane. And it is much more climate damaging than carbon dioxide. The methane, the so-called natural gas, fossil gas in Hamilton and across Ontario primarily comes from fracking, primarily in Pennsylvania. So we have a particularly nasty combination of emissions coming from that source. The emissions that are counted in Hamilton and the ones I'm referring to as the largest section of our formal emissions are just on the basis of burning that fossil gas. They don't count the extra emissions and the extra impact of the fact that it is fracked, and that results in a whole lot of additional damage. Excuse me. So We're actually, excuse me, we're actually actively promoting this gas in Hamilton. We have a bus running around claiming to be negative emissions, and it's burning gas. And that gas, when it's burned, is creating greenhouse gas emissions. And the atmosphere doesn't give a damn whether that gas came from an alleged renewable source or from some other source. It nevertheless sees the emissions as the same as additional greenhouse gases going into our atmosphere. So that's a continuing problem, and I think we need to continue to pay attention to what we can do about that. The second piece I want to talk a little bit about is the home equity or the home energy retrofit program that is being advanced somewhat through the material being presented today by your climate change director. And I'm concerned about this. I had some role in this back along the way. I've been an advocate for it for a long time. And through my role in Environment Hamilton, I have been one of the people who had put forward that we need to take up this kind of response of being able to assist people to reduce their emissions by making direct changes within the buildings they own. But I recognized more recently that this has a big gap in it. And the big gap in it is that about a third of our households don't own their households. They are tenants, they're renters. And the program, as I've seen so far, doesn't seem to address that. And I think that's really problematic because if we look at the impacts of climate change, we look at who is most affected by the extreme weather that we're seeing and will likely see a lot more of, the most vulnerability to extreme heat, the opportunity to retrofit for the people who are in that situation is not advanced or doesn't appear to be advanced by the energy retrofit program. So I think we really need to turn our heads to that. There are ways I think that can be achieved. I've suggested some in the past, but I think we also need to be prepared to make significant financial contributions to assisting those who are in situations where they cannot control the emissions that are coming from their residences because they're not the owners of those residences. And
I ask you to wrap up now, Mr. McLean, because you're already over your limit.
Okay, that generally tends to happen to me. Anyway, I want to raise that flag, and it can be something that we can discuss further in additional meetings as this program begins to be rolled out. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak today, and thank you for the progress that we're seeing on climate change in Hamilton's actions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of Mr. McLean? Councillor Alex Wilson, please.
Thank you, and through the chair, thanks so much, Dawn, for coming out and for delegating today, talking about what our priorities need to be. I just have a question for you. A lot of what I heard was we really need to scale up retrofits, focus on fossil gas, think about our buildings, think about what we call natural gas specifically. And I do see a lot of those programs involve new ways to deliver programs and services. And one of the things we have in the priorities is climate governance, to talk about how as a city we manage that bureaucracy or we manage those programs. Could you connect those dots there between what you were talking about in your delegation and what you would like to see from a climate governance perspective? What are the types of decisions you're hoping we make early on so we can build that retrofit program you're talking about? I think you're really describing where we need to be on the step 3, kind of step 4 piece. Now as we're kind of going on the step 1 and 2, what do you want to see in these early steps so we can get there and get there soon?
Thank you. Mr. McLean, please.
Thank you. Through the chair, thank you, Councillor Wilson, for the question. The challenge that we face here is a large challenge that is aggravated by our economic system, and our situation has been worsened by what the province is doing and failing to participate specifically in addressing the issues of what's happening to our most vulnerable households, and those in particular are people who are in tenant situations. I've suggested there earlier, and others have, that one of the ways that we need to address their situation is by providing particular assistance through something like a free transit program or a much reduced cost transit program, a program that is particularly aimed at people who are in a situation of low income. And I think if we look at our transit riders right now, we see them that overwhelmingly they are tenants or others who have limited opportunities in terms of addressing their greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm hoping that, for example, we take a look at a simple program. We currently charge a lot higher tax rates on tenants than we do on single family homes. And I live in a single family home, and I benefit from that. But there are steps that I think council can take, and you will be, I assume, finalizing your budget work over the next couple of weeks, and seeing again the opportunity to consider changes to the tax rate that is imposed on multi-residential. And it needs to be done in a very careful way, because there is obviously the possibility that the owners of the buildings, the landlords, will be the beneficiaries of the changes in tax rates. They need to be passed down to the tenant households as a way to start addressing that and putting them in a better position. I think we also can look at things like we recognize that we're going to have to go to heat pumps. And that will be a major way of cutting emissions from households in Hamilton. It's something that is understood within the strategy, and but we don't have a way of addressing that in an equitable fashion for low-income households. There are, I believe, in place now mobile maybe isn't the right term, but heat pumps that can be moved around, that are not installed for the whole household, but can be used from room to room. And that technology may be a way in which we can provide direct assistance to households who are facing significant problems from extreme heat. And if we don't do that, we're going to see the kinds of situations we saw in Vancouver and the Lower Mainland a couple of years ago with the heat dome, and many people dying as a result of heat exposure. So we need to find ways to do this. I think that may be one that's worth exploring. It may be something that the city can directly provide, or we can work with the energy companies to extract some of the massive profits that they are accumulating to cover some of the costs of providing these to low-income households, and particularly people in buildings, multi-residential buildings, which don't have any air conditioning, don't have any ways for people to provide cooling. I hope that helps in answering your question.
Thank you. Councillor Alex Wilson, please. Supplemental.
Thank you so much, and through you, Chair Don, it definitely helped. I think you're living in a world where I'm hoping our city gets to, where we're talking about the programs we're doing and the actions we're taking, as opposed to the programs we're building and the actions we want to take. And so as we take these kind of building steps right now, I think climate governance, and as we have this discussion later, what are the types of things we need to do and the decisions we need to make today, so tomorrow we're having the conversations that you're having and you're talking about. I think that's really exciting. And one of the things that I think kept hearing from you was the value and importance of thinking about equity in these conversations. So thanks so much, Don, and those are all my questions.
Thank you. Don't go away, Mr. McLean. Councillor Mark Taddison has a question for you.
Thanks for your delegation here today, Don. You mentioned earlier in your presentation about making steel, and I was wondering, what are your thoughts on ArcelorMittal, Dofasco moving to natural gas to make their steel?
Okay.
Thank you, to the chair. Thank you, Councillor Tadison. I don't think I've actually had the benefit of meeting you personally, but I look forward to doing that. With respect to this proposal that has been made by jointly by ArcelorMittal, Dofasco, and Enbridge, I see a lot of problems with it. I see a particular problem that will increase the amount of gas consumption, fossil gas consumption, producing greenhouse gases in Hamilton by close to 20%, according to the numbers that have been given to Council and provided by Enbridge in their open house. If you look at this, it's being presented as an attractive program because this gas is replacing coal. And coal, we know, is problematic. It is considered the worst of the fossil fuels in terms of its emissions. But if you look at fracked gas, there are a number of researchers who are arguing that fracked gas is just as bad as coal. So we may not be making a huge gain with respect to actual emission reduction through this proposal that has been put forward. We also face the problem that the proposal to build a new pipeline of 14 kilometers, I believe, is not something that is a short-term proposal. It's not something that we can change or that will be changed 10 years from now or 5 years from now. Pipelines are something you put in the ground for 50, 60, 70 years. And we can assume, I think, that Enbridge is not expecting to do this for a short-term proposal, that they're not prepared to put a pipeline in for a brief use by ArcelorMittal Dofasco of gas while we wait for the actual solution for the steelmaking process, which is a switch to hydrogen. So I'm of the view at this point, and we're still looking at the details of this and what possibilities exist, but it appears to me that there is the realistic and approach we want to take is we want to move the steel industry away from fossil fuels entirely and to hydrogen sources, green hydrogen sources, hydrogen that is created with green electricity. There are challenges to that at this point in time, but this sort of step of both federal and provincial governments throwing a pile of money at this seems to me to be a half step at best, and a step that we will be turning around in a few years, hopefully a very short number of years, and saying, okay, that really isn't sufficient. We need to go to a non-fossil fuel source of fuel for the steel industry. So I think that's what we should be pursuing as a municipality. I think that's what we should be pursuing as both federal and provincial governments. That it's nice to find $900 million to help the steel industry shift from high emissions to lower emissions, but are we then going to almost certainly turn around and have to find a similar amount or more to allow them to switch to where we actually need them to switch, which is to a hydrogen-based fuel source that is actually largely emission-free. So I hope that is responsive to your question.
Thank you. Councillor Tadison?
Very much so. Lots to contemplate there. Thank you for that answer. No more questions through the chair.
Thank you, Councillor. We have Councillor Maureen Wilson.
A question to staff after the delegate, please. Thank you.
Is there any further questions of the delegate? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. McLean. It's good to see you again, and thank you very much for your advice to the council.
Thank you very much for listening to me.
Have a good day. And we're moving on to item 8.2, the 2023 priority focus areas for the Office of Climate Change Initiatives, PED 23064 citywide. Dr. Lynda Lukasik, Director of the Office of Climate Change Initiatives, is with us to provide the presentation on 8.2, the priority focus areas for the Office of Climate Change. So I'm not sure if it's Director Dr. Lukasik or Dr. Director Lukasik.
You can call me Lynda.
Well, we're glad you're here. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Chair Clark. And it's wonderful to be here and to finally have an opportunity to share our plan for priorities for 2023. So as you all know, my name is Lynda Lukasik. I'm the Director of the City of Hamilton's Office of Climate Change Initiatives. And I'm here today with the office's Senior Project Manager, Trevor Imhoff. And many of you will already know Trevor, who's worked for many years in healthy and safe communities on the climate file as well as the air quality file. And Trevor also played an instrumental role in the development of the Hamilton Climate Action Strategy. And I just want to also acknowledge that that core team included Andrea McDowell, who's now with Senior Project Manager in Public Works, continuing to do climate work there, and Christine Newbold, who's PED's Manager of Sustainable Communities. So I'm thrilled to have Trevor working with me in the office, and very pleased to be in front of you today to share our proposed 2023 priority focus areas. But before I proceed, I just want to very quickly emphasize that these priorities are not the city's only priorities. Our office priorities are in addition to the various climate change related initiatives already contained within the 2023 work plans of multiple divisions across the city of Hamilton. And this is also a good opportunity for me to also underscore the reality that the City of Hamilton can't do this alone. The city has a role to play by taking aggressive climate action and a critically important role to play as a community leader where climate action is concerned. But we need every Hamiltonian to step up and to help us to the best of their ability. We need local business and industry. We need institutional and other community partners, and we need the community at large to all do what they need to do if we have any hope of succeeding in implementing the strategy and realizing net zero emissions by 2050, or dare I say, if not much sooner. The climate emergency is an existential threat, and it warrants aggressive collective action. All right. So I just want to briefly recap Hamilton's climate action strategy. The strategy was passed by City Council in August of 2022, and it's guided by two core plans. Recharge Hamilton, the Community Energy and Emissions Plan. You've maybe heard reference to the CEEP. This plan is focused on mitigation, or actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change. And the second core component of our strategy is the Climate Change Impact Adaptation Plan. And this plan focuses on actions that help manage or adapt to a changing climate. And I want to acknowledge, obviously, that we are already seeing the impacts of climate. In some respects, sitting in the chambers today and paying attention to what's happening outside of the window, it made me think, we see some pretty severe shifts from 4 degrees this morning to, I think it's going to be 20 degrees Celsius by the time we all head home today. So there are changes happening: flooding, extreme heat, increasing freeze-thaw cycles that are wreaking havoc with our infrastructure. Oops. And I want to add here, too, that climate justice and applying a climate justice lens to all that we do is essential. Embracing climate justice requires acknowledging that climate change can have differing impacts, differing social, economic, public health, and other adverse impacts on vulnerable and marginalized community members. And we need to consider and address this imbalance through the climate mitigation and adaptation actions that we take. With that. I also just wanted to very briefly share the Hamilton context. These are our major sources of greenhouse gas emissions. Industry is a major source, and then we've also got transportation and buildings in there in the top 3. So Hamilton is a little bit unique within the GTHA because our industrial emissions are so substantial, but we can't forget that those other sources of emissions, while when you look at this chart they may seem insignificant, They aren't. They're on par with emissions that we see in other GTHA municipalities. So we really need to take collective action to address all of these sources. And I just want to share with you, within each of the plans in our SEEP, we have 5 low carbon transformations that we're focusing on, and they are reflective in the SEEP around where we want to see greenhouse gas emission reductions. So innovating our industry, you heard a little bit in the previous presentation about the importance of decarbonization, transforming our buildings, getting them to net zero, changing how we move around, revolutionizing renewables. We need more renewable energy in this community, and growing green. We know that trees and native plants and all of that wonderful stuff really helps us with climate. And then these are just the 4 theme areas that exist within our climate adaptation plan. We've got a resilient theme focused on the built environment and associated systems. People and health, this is a really important one. People become more vulnerable with climate impacts. The natural environment, agriculture, and water, and how those are impacted by climate change. And then the 4th in the theme areas is energy and economy. So I just want to say, I hope you're all, if you haven't already, familiarizing yourself with our climate action strategy. And I want to say that we're a small, right now, but mighty team within the Office of Climate Change Initiatives, and we're always happy to talk with councillors about the plan if you feel you need, and the strategy if you feel you need more information. All right, now on to the priorities for the Office of Climate Change Initiatives. We have priority focus areas organized under the following 5 themes: climate change governance and innovation, community climate outreach, carbon budgeting, green buildings, and urban greening. And again, I've got that note at the bottom that these are priorities for our office that we're proposing for this year. We know there's lots more to do, and also want to acknowledge that we're not the only ones currently doing work on getting those city-led climate actions underway. Lots happening in other departments and divisions. So I'm going to walk through each of those theme areas, starting with the first one, climate change governance and innovation. Under the first theme, the first 2 items are critically important. Internal governance pieces really aimed at bringing city staff together to effectively track and report on progress with implementation of the city-led actions that are contained within the climate action strategy, and to monitor associated greenhouse gas emission reductions. We also know that these internal structures are going to serve as very important spaces for staff learning, collaboration, support, innovation, and ideally acceleration of our city-led climate actions. The next on the list is the recruiting and onboarding of new Office of Climate Change Initiative staff. So the 2023 municipal budget has given us the green light and the resources that we need to hire 2 new staff within our office. So we'll have a new project manager and a senior project manager, doubling our team effectively to 4 full-time staff. And this enhanced staff capacity is really going to be essential to enable us to do the work that we need to do. And just so you're aware, these new staff are going to be recruited within the next couple of months. So we're moving quickly to bring them on board. The theme also includes the establishment of and the support for the Community Climate Advisory Committee. And this is a really exciting piece of the effort as it pulls representatives in from the broader community into the Hamilton Climate Action Strategy to play a direct and ongoing role advising, helping to share and celebrate community-led climate actions and initiatives, and ensuring that we collectively succeed with applying that climate justice lens to our efforts in a meaningful way. The committee terms of reference have been carefully crafted, and you all have seen them, you've approved them, to ensure that membership reflects the diversity of our community. And we hope to be able to do a call out for community members to apply to serve on that committee soon. I also want to say it's worth noting at this point, and this is where the innovation piece comes in, is that the establishment of these governance structures is also going to facilitate our ability in the Office of Climate Change Initiatives to support climate innovation. We're going to be bringing players together, both internally and externally, and we'll have those opportunities to talk about funding creative pilot projects and initiatives and other efforts that will support strategic implementation of the Hamilton Climate Action Strategy via the city's Climate Change Reserve. We also expect the reserve is going to be utilized to support our OCCI priorities this year and beyond. And I'm also excited that the reserve now has a sustainable source of funding moving forward, and that, again, was a decision that came out of the 2023 budget. On the community climate outreach side, under this theme area for this year, we are going to work on developing a climate change initiatives communication strategy. And we've already initiated some conversations with Matthew Grant and his team in communications. And one of the pieces that we're including here are good news stories to profile city-led actions already underway or emerging. For instance, I want to share a few with you. Did you know that the City of Hamilton has already deployed 2 electric Zambonis? One is at the Carlisle Arena and the other is at the Beverly Arena. And these ice resurfacers are operating so well that there are plans already underway to order 3 more. City Housing Hamilton, you may all be aware, is embracing Passive House standards for its new facilities and renovations. And this one I love. The 18-story Ken Sobel Tower, for instance, was retrofitted to Passive House standards. And this resulted in decreasing the building's greenhouse gas emissions by 90%. Huge. And I want to also share that if you didn't know this already, it's the first high-rise retrofit in North America to receive international Passive House certification. And that's leadership, and that's what we need more of in Hamilton on this file. I also want to share that the Forestry and Horticulture Division within the city's environmental services continues to up its game where trees and tree maintenance and urban forest expansion are concerned. For instance, did you know that forestry now has an annual free tree giveaway? It's now part of its annual budget, where it's getting 3,000 plus native trees into the hands of Hamiltonians for planting on private property. And this is really important because we know that the urban forest canopy, 60% of it sits on private property. So we know we need to get more native trees onto private property to help us to get to where we need to be on that front. So these are just a few examples of some of what's happening in the city already, but we need to really focus on telling those stories, sharing those stories. Our strategy is also going to help to share the good news stories of other community stakeholders, industry, business, community organizations, even community members at large who are individually doing wonderful things. And I just want to say, tackling the climate crisis is tough. You know, I've worked on the outside for a long time, pushing for change, now sitting on the inside and almost feeling a heavier burden around how important it is to act. It's tough stuff. So we need to celebrate the positive actions, and we need to use those to inspire and to motivate more action from others around us. The communication strategy is also going to include some Climate 101 so that we keep on making sure that people understand why climate and the climate crisis is something we need to be paying attention to. And that'll also include ensuring that Hamiltonians understand the Hamilton Climate Action Strategy, what's in it, and what role they can and have to play along with us to get us to where we need to be. And under this theme, we're also working to finalize the agreement in partnership with the Bay Area Climate Change Council. Many of you will be aware that we have supported them in the past and will continue to do so into the future. And for those who aren't familiar with BAC, the council is all about really effective regional collaboration. So it's a Hamilton-Burlington regional focused effort. And it's also focused on enhancing climate action. So I can tell you Hamilton as a city has already benefited immensely from the focused efforts of the council's implementation team. So these are tables of experts and community stakeholders who come together in a focused way to tackle and talk about climate issues. And there's a table that's existed that's been very much focused, for instance, on building retrofits. I also want to take a chance while I'm up here to plug the fact that BAC is hosting a public forum next week, April 13th. The title of it is Your City Taking Climate Action. And so staff from both municipalities are going to have a chance to share with the broader community what we've got planned in the way of initiatives over 2023 and into 2024. Finally, under community climate outreach, we'll be finalizing our OCCI annual reporting format and methodology. Reporting has been happening on an annual basis, and we're anticipating that we'll be in front of you in October with an annual report. But over time, we expect the content of that report is going to change as we implement more pieces of the plan. Pieces like the carbon accounting framework, which is going to bring more for us to report to you on beyond the greenhouse gas emission reductions piece. So these are the last three themes. One of the ones that we have up here is carbon budgeting. And this is an important piece where this year we are planning to initiate the creation of a carbon budget framework. And if you look at the climate action strategy, it makes reference to a broader carbon accounting framework, and it's multi-pronged. So there's a piece there around green procurement, for instance. But obviously the carbon budget is an important prong in that framework. And essentially, carbon budgets establish caps on how much a community can emit, leading up to its target years for emission reductions. So the Office of Climate Change Initiatives will work with finance to initiate the creation of that carbon budget framework. We're going to need to do some research to understand better what makes sense for Hamilton moving forward. And our goal will ultimately be to start to implement that framework across at least one, maybe two departments for the 2024 budget, almost as a testing out. But ultimately, the plan is going to be to implement that carbon budget framework across the entire corporation into the future. We've also got the theme of green buildings, and that's important. The first item on that list is the adoption of an energy performance net zero standard for all new municipal buildings as a 2023 priority to get moving on. And this is a standard we're excited about, and our office will be developing that in partnership with the city's Office of Energy Initiatives. And I just want to recognize here as well that corporate facilities and energy management and the team in the Office of Energy Initiatives already have work well underway to develop a pathway to net zero for all existing corporate buildings. As we know, we need to get those facilities to net zero by 2050, if not before. And adding that focus on new corporate buildings will help the city to lead the way where net zero buildings in Hamilton are concerned. I think leading by example is going to be an important part of how we make change happen. The other item under green buildings is also a critical one, and that's the implementation of a home energy retrofit opportunity pilot residential program. And that HERO pilot is going to enable us within the OCCI to test the viability of a low-interest loan program for residents as a method for facilitating deep home energy retrofits. And Trevor Imhoff from our office, Trevor's been working on this file for a while. He's been working hard to get this effort to the final approval stages. So we really hope to have Trevor back in front of the GIC in the coming weeks to share more details about next steps with this important effort. And then the last theme we have is urban greening. So we're really going to be working in 2023 into 2024 to facilitate implementation of enhanced urban greening initiatives. So we're going to coordinate with relevant city departments and key community partners on this one in an effort to amplify efforts to green up heavily industrialized areas through deep cave projects and other innovative approaches to greening our urban streetscapes and surrounding sites. And these efforts are going to be undertaken with that goal of equitable distribution, because that's going to be a real challenge. We know that some of our most challenged neighborhoods are lacking the most when it comes to green and urban green. So that'll be an important piece of operationalizing our commitment to climate justice in the climate action strategy. This is my last slide. And so this is just the text of the recommendation that's before you today. So we're looking for members of GIC to receive our proposed priority focus areas. And item B on our list is a request focused on authorization to approve expenditures. And I just want to say we acknowledge that we need to get moving on implementation of actions that we've set out in the climate action strategy, including these 2023 priorities, and hence this request that the GM of Planning and Economic Development be authorized to approve expenditures up to $250,000. And I'll look towards GM Thorne if he wants to elaborate on this item. And then as well, item C is the last that will be back, as I said, in front of you with an annual report to provide updates on progress with our focus areas, including updates on any spending that happens through that climate change reserve. Thank you so much, and happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Before we go to questions, GM Thorne, did you have anything to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just with respect to item B, so this was the new funds that were established through the 2023 budget process, but without any delegated authorities in terms of how those are spent. Typically for reserves like this, there would be a limit upon which staff could approve those funds and beyond which it would come to council. So as Lynda mentioned, there's a few of those actions that we do anticipate requiring some outside expertise. I'll note in particular carbon budgeting, anticipating probably some community partnerships around some of the urban greening work. So that amount of funds would allow us to do some of those smaller scale initiatives. Some of the larger items, like for example, the home energy retrofit program, would be coming back in front of council as a separate report with the financial impacts and seeking direction separately for that one. Thank you.
Thank you. That's most helpful. We have a number of questioners. Councillor Kretsch, please. You're first.
Hi, Director Lukasik. Thank you so much for your presentation. I know all your work on the outside. I'm very thrilled that you're doing that work here on the inside. I really appreciate you being clear about when we sort of get a recharge of this information or look to what's happening in 2024 and 2025 by an annual report process. Is that primarily the way we're going to be getting sort of information and inputs about what's happening with this climate action strategy and what the focus areas for the Office of Climate Change Initiatives is going to be?
Lynda?
Through you, Chair. That's going to be one of the main ways for sure, but I fully expect, as Jim Thorne has pointed out, there are going to be pieces that come forward that will map out details for some of the key elements of our priorities, like the home energy retrofit opportunity, where you'll have another opportunity to hear from us. And I would add too that we've got we'll soon have a community climate advisory committee. I think that's also going to be another important venue where staff will be interacting with those community representatives. That committee is structured so that there will be 2 non-voting members of council sitting on the committee as well. So I think another important space where information will be shared around climate action strategy implementation.
Councillor Kretsch, please.
Yeah.
Thanks. And through the chair, my next question is just about sort of the impact or effect of the work you're going to be doing across the city from your office. And so one of the ways I read some of the things you've talked about here, other things I've read that this department's doing, are you're going to in some way supercharge some things that are already going on. You're going to add a focus to things. You're going to suggest ways that we can meet our climate change goals through programs that are already going on. It's like an accurate description of part of what the work you're doing is going to be kind of supercharging projects that are already going on with the climate focus.
Director Lukasik.
Through you, Chair. Yes, I think that's a fair description for sure. The example of the community partners, reaching out to community partners who we know how to do some of this work, and figuring out how we can partner with them and supercharge their efforts on the ground as an example. But internally as well, I think there are opportunities through some of the governance structures that we're creating to identify where are the opportunities, say in public works, where with a little bit more support they may be able to enhance an effort or try something new. So yeah, I think supercharging is a good descriptor.
Councillor.
Thanks. My last kind of question, and then a very brief comment, is about outreach and innovation. So you talked about 2 of the things you were doing. One was about outreach. The way I look at that is like, okay, we're going to be engaging with people in the community who know what's going on. We're going to be speaking to people and bringing those resources in. And the innovation piece seems like leveraging. So I know that Councillor Alex Wilson, Councillor Maureen Wilson, a couple of others have talked a lot about this term of council already, specifically talking about, look, like we have groups out there already who are doing amazing work. How can we leverage the work that they're doing? Is that a pretty big focus of what you're going to be doing in terms of connecting with people in the community to try and bring those assets in here as close to us as humanly possible, even though on the outside, we're touching the glass, and so we can access them. Is that part of a big part of your work?
Yeah, through the chair, yes, for sure. And I think Bay Area Climate Change Council is a good example where they're an entity that can help us with promoting some of the priorities that I've talked to you about here today. So absolutely, looking at those synergies and how can we tap into them, and also how do we keep on sending that message. This has become really important to me sitting where I'm sitting right now, helping people to understand that this is not just a City of Hamilton plan. So getting those external stakeholders to help us with that messaging will be very important.
Councillor.
Thanks. And through the chair, my last question is about equity. So for me, a big part of every time I hear the word climate change, I think about impacts very broadly. Being the Ward 2 City Councillor, obviously I'm preoccupied with what's happening downtown sometimes. And so knowing that a lot of the historically not very green neighborhoods are in the lower city, places where impacts are felt most directly through urban heat impacts are felt here. How will the work you be bringing forward really focus on identifying those inequities and trying to solve them across the city? I say this because to date, and this has been my experience, when we are thinking about how we distribute resources across the city, the sidewalk budget's a great example. You know, Ward 2 gets 5% of the sidewalk budget. Okay, because of the length of the sidewalks. That's the only measure. So I'm looking to understand how you're going to be measuring the outputs of resources that we allocate across the city to address our climate change impacts.
Director.
Through the chair, that's a really good question. I know that for us, we need to make sure that that climate justice lens is driving decision making, especially, you know, when you look at our strategies, the climate impact adaptation piece is a really important one when it comes to that equity issue and making sure that we're prioritizing our efforts in areas where we know we really need to prioritize. And I'm going to be honest in saying to you that we're probably going to be figuring out as we go. I think on some of these issues we have, you know, within the municipality, in different departments and divisions, we have some of the information that we need, or we know it's emerging. And I'll give one example. You know, if you think about urban greening, we know how important urban tree canopy cover is when we're talking about things like the urban heat island effect. We've got some information about that, and I know that there's more sort of refined information coming that's going to help us to be able to look from neighborhood to neighborhood at what the status of coverage is. And so information like that is certainly going to help to guide our efforts. Some of it is just, you know, lived experience. You know, I think anyone can walk down the street and know, walk down a street on a hot day and you know where the areas are that we need to focus some attention. So I hope that starts to answer your question. I think internally we've got, you know, sitting out, you know, beyond the Office of Climate Change Initiatives, we've got some understanding and information. I think it's just a matter of bringing all the right players together, and maybe add on that front that there is internal organizing happening across departments around the extreme heat piece. We know that's an important one, and we know it's not just us sitting in the Office of Climate Change Initiatives. Healthy and safe communities, public health has an important role to play. We could argue public works and the forestry greening piece is an important component. So how do we effectively bring everyone around the table and get to where we need to go? I think that's what you're going to see unfolding more and more moving forward.
Councillor.
Thank you so much. That does answer my question. Looking forward to all the work you do to supercharge the things we're doing already and bringing the equity focus to the places that need it most. Thank you so much for your work. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Alex Wilson, please.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, Dr. Lukasik, I think you have a really interesting job in our city, and you have to kind of straddle hope and despair day in and day out. And I don't think that's an easy job, and I think you've done a good job showing that there. And I just want to start briefly by saying, like, there's nothing in this that I see here. Like, yes, the Bay Area Climate Change Council didn't exist in the 1990s, but similar bodies or implementation bodies could. And I want to stress that, like, none of this, there's no reason any of the work in this report couldn't have happened before I was born. And I think that's the despair piece here, is we're starting at least 40 years late. And now that we are starting 40 years late, we have a lot of work to do, and we have to do it very, very quickly. I look at the 12 recommendations here for kind of a year one goal, and I agree, these are really smart year one recommendations, because they're about what is the infrastructure we need to move faster moving forward. Understanding who needs to be at the table, how can we make these decisions, what's the new framework for that. And so getting us ready still seems to be the phase we're in, and we're still getting ready to take climate action. We're getting ready to do more. Yet we also know we have this term of council and next term of council before we're hoping to be at 50% of our emissions. And so what does 2030 look like from where you're sitting? We do these recommendations in year one. We continue to do more work in year 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're now approaching 2030. What does Hamilton look like? What have we achieved given we started this work now?
Through the chair, I'm glad you share my stress, Councillor, over all of this. It is stressful, and I think there is some recognition, and sadly we're not alone sitting in Hamilton. I think this has been, richer countries and communities across the globe have this challenge of, we should have done more in the past, and here we are. So I'm an eternal optimist. So the way I look at this is we get cracking and we see where this takes us, and we do what we can to achieve what we've set out here to start to get things rolling. And I hope we start to build momentum, and it facilitates our ability to move faster and to bring. I keep talking about bringing everyone else along with us, and I don't think I can emphasize enough how important that is and how important that's going to be in making sure that all of us are sending that message out there. So I hope by 2030 we are where we need to be, if not, even beyond. I have to be optimistic and hope that we're capable of doing that. I think we understand why it's so important. So I hope that answers your question. I don't know how else to respond at this point other than to say, let's just roll our sleeves up and get going and build on the momentum and just look forward and get to where we need to go. Councillor? We've got too much to lose if we don't.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that is actually a perfect answer to the question, because when we read through IPCC reports, International Panel on Climate Change from the UN body, top scientists, and they're talking about how to achieve these changes, they talk about the enabling conditions we need, not just what we're doing, but the type of ecosystem or the environment we have to create to do this work. And I see a lot of this is building that capacity in-house, so we have an environment where we can do climate action. So that's really exciting. I do have a question, though, is you're operating under a climate action strategy and an adaptation framework that you didn't consult on because you're new to this role. We also have 10 new members of council. While understanding we just need to get moving, and we know these are good first steps, as we think ahead to year 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we start thinking ahead, are the plans we have today the right plans? Do those give us the right scaffolding to move us forward? I think specifically about growing green, knowing that we have a forthcoming biodiversity action plan, urban canopy strategy. Those types of pieces aren't included in our growing green section of our climate action strategy right now, and in that detail, or in the detail they could. Where do you think some of those points of reflection will be along this kind of 6-7 year journey that we have ahead of us? And when do you think we should be doing some of that review, knowing that year one, we maybe have enough of a plan, but when does that come in?
Yeah.
Thank you, Director.
Through the chair. That one is also a tough question to answer, because I think, as you well know, within a global context, the marker is moving around. And that's something that I think, we need to, moving forward, again, I'm going to say we've got a plan, we need to get moving, but moving forward, I think we need to be committed to an iterative process where we're carefully thinking about new information as it emerges and adapting accordingly. And that may mean, circling back and adding to, modifying, doing what we need to do so that in that trajectory forward, as a community, we're achieving what we need to achieve in terms of climate action. Yeah.
Councillor?
So I hope that answers your question.
Again, yes, thank you. Through the chair, I think that does really answer the question. And then so my final question is just, and so under the climate governance perspective, we have a 3-tiered framework, or not tiers per se, but we have a 3-pronged framework. We have a implementation committee or a senior committee, we have an extended committee, and then we have a citizen committee in-house that we're going to be doing to advise some of this work. Where do you see those prompts for that iterative process coming in the most? Or if folks are listening now and they say, hey, I want to make some tweaks, this is great for year 1, but I want to have year 2 look a little different, or here are things that happen in year 3, and I don't think our current plan sets us up for success there. Where does that work begin, do you see, under this kind of model that you're proposing?
Yeah, through the chair, that's a good question as well. I know with our Community Climate Advisory Committee, there is an opportunity for that group to keep circling back and revisiting its terms of reference. So I think that gives the community stakeholders sitting around the table an opportunity to push for change that they think needs to happen. I think that's an interesting question around, those internal committees. And we're just in the process of pulling together terms of reference to guide those committees. But I think you're raising an important point, just in terms of creating that space, within the bureaucracy to have those conversations. And I can imagine we'll be hearing from all of you around the council table around what you think needs to happen in the way of any shifting of direction or changing or moving more quickly. So hopefully the combination of all three of those inputs is going to keep us going where we need to go.
Councillor?
Thanks so much. Really supportive of these 12 kind of first steps and excited for 13, 14 and on.
Thank you.
The next speaker would be Councillor Wang, please.
Thank you. Through you, Deputy Mayor, to Director Lukasik, I have a couple of questions. As it relates to focus area number 6, the development of a climate change initiatives comms strategy, we get a lot of comms stuff come to us, but then it kind of goes in one ear and out another. I wonder if there's going to be a future sort of thought where we might have an education hub where all of these comms strategies and communiques kind of live, because then that way it gives our community, and especially for myself, an opportunity to reach back in and actually see what other communiques have. Is that something that we can consider?
Yeah.
Director, please.
Through the chair, absolutely. Because as I was sharing, we're even thinking to the level of Climate 101 to make sure that people out in the community understand why the climate emergency and climate change is so important. So I think we could, maybe get a little bit creative in terms of how we're packaging up that information and putting it out there. And I really love that idea of the public-facing information sharing, so that maybe we can talk in the future about adding something to the Climate Action Strategy website that, click here if you want some basic information on climate. Click here to learn more about the Hamilton Climate Action Strategy. And it might be multimedia, might be some written pieces, might be, videos, I don't know. But yeah, I hear what you're saying, Councillor. I think that's something that it's worth us taking back and thinking about more.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And as a follow-up to that question, through you, Deputy Mayor, I think about growing up, it was think globally, act locally. So are we, through this comms strategy, how are we enabling the staff in the community to do things for themselves? Maybe that's how they can add to how they're going to contribute to this climate strategy.
Director Lukasik.
Through the chair. Yeah, great point. So one of the things that we think is also important is sharing information about what people can do, what individuals in the community can do. But I would add that I think the hope is also that, moving forward, we have partners in the community who help us with that piece as well. There are lots of great community organizations out there already very good at doing programming that mobilizes and engages community and helps people to know what they can do. I think a combination of us communicating simple suggestions that anybody could take on with, what's already, or maybe amplifying what's happening through other organizations would be a good way to go. Because you're right, I think that's a regular and common question. People are worried about the climate crisis, and some people just don't know what to do about it, where to start.
Councillor.
Thank you. And I think along the same line of thinking is I'm curious about how this group and under your direction is going to help enable staff to think about what they can do inside of this corporation. And I'm also mindful that we are doing much better when it comes to talking to each of the departments, and departments are talking better to each other. But there is still a culture of, this is my group, I don't talk to another group. How are you going to sort of break down some of these silos and integrate this line of thinking into the corporate culture of City Hall here?
Director.
Through the chair, I'm hopeful that those internal committees are going to go a long way to helping with that. I'm just in my experiences now in my 4th month with the city. I'm going to be honest in saying to you, I'm blown away by how eager city staff are around climate, and they're ready to take action. Mm-hmm. So I'm already seeing lots of creative conversations happening across departments and divisions, and I think those internal governance structures are only going to help even further with the silo busting, if you want to call it that, but creating those spaces where people can come together regularly and talk about ideas and figure out where there's overlap and where there are synergies, and how we can learn from each other, how we can work together to move forward. So I'm hoping we'll see. I'm seeing it already. I'm hoping we'll see even more of that once we've got those ways to regularly come together and focus on the climate action strategy and its implementation.
Okay.
Councillor.
Thank you. Last question through you, Deputy Mayor. I'm mindful that there are some amazing entrepreneurial individuals in the community and startup companies that are focusing on climate change and focusing on delivering solutions. one of their opportunities is to look at it from the corporation and how do we procure or how do we work with external organizations that are not necessarily like the Environment Hamiltons or Bay Area Climate Change, but private sector, sort of small startup companies. Is that something that's on your radar, and is that something that your office may consider in the future?
Director, please.
Through the chair. So green procurement is definitely one of the prongs in that carbon accounting framework. So you'll be hearing more about that into the future. But I would add too another piece that's in the Hamilton Climate Action Strategy that I think is a really important one is the Hamilton Regional Decarbonization Hub. So creating that space to bring together stakeholders, including industry, business, research institutions, the city, to have those really productive conversations about how do we do more of this? How do we move forward in a way where we're truly embracing an economy that is really effectively moving towards net zero? And that might be a space where the entrepreneurs you're describing would be able to be plugged into efforts moving forward. But to me, that's a really critical piece, because it feels like right now, there are little seeds of ideas, and some bigger. I mean, I know reference was made to ArcelorMittal Dofasco in that transition towards, ultimately towards green steel production happening over here. But imagine if we had a table of stakeholders regularly convening and talking about these issues. I think there's huge power in that. And Hamilton as a community has this wonderful history of very effectively using those stakeholder structures to have an impact. The remedial action plan for the harbor, Bay Area Climate Change Council is another example. So I think something like that could really help businesses of all sizes on this shift, and with the injection of new and innovative ideas too.
Councillor?
Deputy Mayor, I'm particularly enthused with how this climate change office is coming forward, especially when we start to hear a lot of the same strategies that we've been hearing actually earlier today. Decarbonization hub, we were talking about green initiatives in the foreign direct investment strategy. So it's starting to sound like we are breaking down some of those barriers by referencing some of the different strategies that we're currently putting into place. But thank you so much, Director, and thank you, Deputy Mayor. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Councillor. Our next speaker is officially the last Deputy Mayor, Councillor Tom Jackson. I had to correct the record.
Deputy Mayor Clark, everything's fine. When one is chosen,
Are we still friends?
Absolutely. When one other is chosen, I never get interfere with that decision.
Okay, that's taken 1 minute of your time. Go ahead, Councillor.
Dr. Lukasik, congratulations on your new hire and your new position. Obviously, your credentials speak for itself, and looking forward to working with you and learning more from you and your office, and possibly having a community meeting up on the East Mountain with some presentation from yourself. 2 questions for you, and then one for the General Manager. On page 7, you're wanting to establish a community climate advisory committee. I hear the word stakeholders. I often worry that citizens at large may not be represented, that bring a different perspective, that stakeholders have either vested interests or have been at the advocacy game for a long period of time. Will citizens at large at least be taken under advisement as possibilities? Through you, Deputy Mayor, please.
Thank you. Director?
Through the chair, absolutely, Councillor. The terms of reference have been structured with that acknowledgement that we need those community at large voices, and consideration has even been given to the importance of youth at the table as well. So yes, we are. I hear what you're saying. And there will be stakeholders there too. We'll have representatives of business and industry, and I think that will make for a very interesting mix and a productive mix, we hope, bringing all of those players together, because I think sometimes, bringing all of those different perspectives into the same room is what really gets us moving in the direction that we need to go in. So yes, absolutely.
Thank you for that reassurance, Director. On slide 9, initiative creation of a carbon budget framework. So I'm not going to get ahead of any possible contentious debate at this time, but if that is somewhat leading to an eventual carbon local tax, fee, whatever way you want to describe it, I would just sincerely, Deputy Mayor Clark, hope that we have an opportunity as a governing body to have a robust discussion over that. Any thoughts on that? Or if I've totally misinterpreted that, Director, please correct me. Through you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Director Lukasik.
Through the chair. Councillor, this isn't anything that will resemble a carbon tax. We've got that in place already. So no, it won't be at the municipal level. More details to come. You know, we've got to do more research and figure out what it needs to look like for Hamilton. But I think the simplest way to describe carbon budget is you imagine a household budget. You know, you've got a limit. And you can't go beyond that limit. You want to stay within your budget. So it's a similar sort of exercise where you establish what's our community's carbon budget, looking forward to our ultimate goal of net zero by 2050, and it then guides to a certain degree municipal decision making. So you're going to hold your decisions up against, well, here's our budget. You know, we don't want to overspend on the carbon side. So it's designed as a framework to really influence, and it's a more disciplined way of ensuring that we're making the right decisions moving forward. So I hope that helps. But as I say, I'm no expert on carbon budgets. Lots more information to come. But it definitely, won't take the form of a tax that would impact on community members.
You've already lowered my stress level with that answer, Director. Thank you very much, at least at this moment in time. I really appreciate that. And General Manager Thorne, on slide 10, again, the B part, I'm more than obviously pleased and willing to give you the authorization to spend up to $250,000. But instead of just the annual reporting, which the new director is committed to, which I'm thrilled about, maybe could there be information updates along the way when that kind of expenditure has occurred, so that we just don't have to wait 12 months to hear about maybe a multitude of expenditures that occurred. Through you, Deputy Mayor, my last question.
Thank you, GM Thorne.
Yes, through the chair, no concerns with that. And in fact, those funds would be tied to advancing some of the climate change initiatives. So all in one, we can report on the status of those initiatives and any funding impacts as they go. So I'm happy to do that.
Councillor, any follow-up?
Thank you, GM. And Deputy Mayor, I know there's much greater champions of the environment around this table than I have been, but it's a learning process for myself and encouraging what I've been presented with today. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Clark.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Councillor Mark Tattison, please.
Thanks for your presentation, Director. My question kind of goes around something that Councillor Kretsch brought up. It's not so much equity-based, it's just kind of like trying to help me connect the dots in your mandate. So I'm looking here and I'm seeing 5 focus areas. I won't read them off. On slide 5, I saw resilient theme, people and health. Is that where climate emergency preparedness comes in? Because a big part of Trevor's work before this was climate emergency preparedness, and from what I see, it's kind of not really a focus in this presentation here, and I think it should be, and I might be wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong, I think climate emergency preparedness with flooding and the heat that Councillor Kretsch meant, like, what are we doing in this report that's going to address that?
Director.
Through the chair, so this might be a good time to just reemphasize too that we've got other divisions and departments actively working. So I hear what you're saying, and we have folks in healthy and safe communities, public health, paying a lot of attention on that front and convening others. So we're convening our office and other departments and divisions to have more fulsome conversations moving forward about what some of those pieces need to look like. I should also add, we've got the climate change reserve, so there may be opportunities through that reserve, even over the course of this year, to start to talk about are there community partners who could help to play a role on that front. And I see Trevor up there. I'm going to look towards Trevor. Trevor, I don't know if you want to speak to this issue, because Trevor's come from that transition of sitting within healthy and safe communities to sitting where he is now. And so you may want to add to that, Trevor.
Trevor, please.
Through the chair, thank you, Director Lukasik, to Councillor Tattison. Lynda is exactly right. In theme 2 that you saw, Councillor Tattison, on people and health, that is the theme in our climate adaptation action, which was approved by Council, which specific implementation plans around, for example, setting up a vulnerable persons response program, setting up a buddy system, looking at extreme heat interventions, and those are actions that are geared towards, for example, healthy, safe communities, public health, for example. I know there's probably folks in Hamilton Water sitting on the call online, looking at flood awareness, flood vulnerability mapping across the city through their stormwater and wastewater. I'm going to get the word wrong again. Sorry, stormwater integration study. That's not what it's called. But lots of, as Lynda pointed out at the beginning of the presentation, lots of existing actions across the department. And our focus as an office is to break down those silos and bring that all holistically back to Council on an annual basis.
And Trevor, if you could provide us your full name and your title, please.
Through the Chair, thank you and my apologies. Trevor Imhoff, Senior Project Manager in the Office of Climate Change Initiatives.
Thank you, sir. Okay, Councillor, back to you.
Thank you for that answer. Consider the dots connected.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker, Councillor Nan.
Thank you. Through you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you, Director, for the overview and the presentation. Just a few questions. Glad to hear about the Climate 101 component, but I was wondering also about how education and awareness building around climate justice is also going to be integrated into the work that's being done.
Director.
Through the Chair, good question, Councillor, and an important one. We'll need to figure that piece out. Part of what I've been reflecting on a lot is maybe the need for us to delve more deeply into that component of the climate action strategy. So, you know, I have seen in other jurisdictions where there are sort of additional written pieces where community has been brought together to have those conversations. So I can tell you that one thing that we have been already working on through the Office of Climate Change Initiatives is tapping into resources like City Lab, just to enlist students to help us with, let's look at how other municipalities in Ontario and beyond have taken this piece and really effectively integrated it into all that they do. And I'm going to be honest with you in saying that it feels like we need to do some more delving into and figuring that piece out so that moving forward, we are in a meaningful way paying attention to this piece. And I'm also hopeful, you know, that in combination with pulling together, you know, effectively recruiting in the right people to sit around the Community Climate Advisory Committee table, that those two pieces will help us to ensure that we're paying attention to that piece and we're embracing and applying it in a meaningful way.
Thank you for that. Through you, Deputy Mayor, it also, for me, speaks to our integration of our you know, when we speak about our land acknowledgement at the beginning of every meeting and how we're integrating what we're saying at the beginning of every council meeting into the very fabric and framework of our climate action plan. And when I think about that in terms of acknowledging not only in clear terms the inequity that exists in the experience of climate impact for residents across our city and in the area and the land that we share, I think it becomes so clear, like it's like foundational. And so how we're talking about this really does need to include that foundational aspect, I think, moving forward, because partly this work is catching up on 40 years of best practices, but also because we are in a term as a city moving towards integrating and connecting those dots that have historically remained siloed. And the ability then for us to advance our progress on historical issues, I think could get really catapulted if we do this with integrity in that way. And I really look forward to your ongoing leadership and engagement on that issue. On that piece, through you, Deputy Mayor, how does environmental and climate justice awareness and training factor into the governance area that you outlined earlier?
Director.
Through the chair, that's a really good question. I think as we do a better job of figuring out what an effective framework looks like, I think we're going to need to ensure that we have conversations in that external Community Climate Advisory Committee with that group informing what the framework needs to look like, and ensuring that internally we're sharing that information and committing to being guided by what that framework looks like. And I just want to add too, I think another interesting piece, just hearing your response to your comments prior to this last question, I think it's also reflecting on forms of knowledge, right? I think that's something that's important to reflect on as well. As we're figuring these pieces out moving forward, how do we almost reframe the way we look at forms of knowledge, what's legitimate, what gets factored into the decision making, even in terms of some of the priority pieces we talked about today. How is the decision making being guided, and how could we do a better job, through the Community Climate Advisory Committee and their networks into the community to inform decisions using that kind of information? I think would be an interesting piece to be reflecting on as well.
Thank you. And so I think in response to Councillor Jackson's question about the Community Climate Advisory Committee, so did I hear correctly that if residents aren't at the table in the same weight, right? How are we, or what considerations would it be up to that committee to decide how it's going to hold the voices and experiences of residents in its decision making, or is it something that can be, anyway, I don't know what I'm trying to say now. I'm clearly digesting my lunch, not thinking clearly. Go.
Through the chair, that's a good question. I don't know if I know the answer fully. I know we're going to work hard, and again, I'm going to look to Trevor, give Trevor an opportunity to elaborate a little bit more on the terms of reference and how that committee has been structured, and our hopes for how, with the right group of people around the table, how it's going to function. So Trevor, you may want to add some more.
Trevor, please.
Through the chair to Councillor Nan, it's such a great and an important question, and this is what we're proud of in the terms of reference too, that not only does the Community Climate Change Terms of Reference have an EDI objective of a minimum 50% gender diversity split, but as well as to achieve a 30% representation from equity deserving groups across the community. One of the scopes or the key mandates of the Community Climate Change Advisory Committee is around working together to better understand the diverse perspectives across Hamilton's community, to better provide advice and recommendations to council and to city staff to ensure no one is left behind. And so that's an embedded objective into the Community Climate Change Advisory Committee. And I'll say one last thing on that too, and how important this community group is to ensure all the voices are heard, is that even if, so for example, we have 3 seats for citizens, we have 2 seats for youth, we have 2 seats for Indigenous representation on this reserve for those demographic of populations. If someone in whatever demographic or population doesn't get picked or to be part of this committee, because it is a formal advisory committee, it's open to public and public commenting, as well as the future Climate Change Advisory Committee. If they feel that, or council feels, or other people want to recommend that they feel don't have the proper representation, there is the ability of this advisory committee to set up individual working groups, which would then feed into this overall Community Climate Change Advisory Committee. Thank you.
Councillor.
Thank you. And so looking forward to the work unfolding, looking forward to seeing and hearing from our representatives around the table, and also hearing that there is opportunity for course correction along the way should anything not be functioning in the optimal way or achieving the objective of the terms of reference. There may be some structural change that might get recommended. That's for down the road. I appreciate that. I heard that really clearly. Thank you. And then the next question, if I could, through you, and Director Lukasik, you and I have talked about this now for a number of years, but in this context and in this role and on slide number 3, that's the one that I can't help but continue to come back to. recognizing our climate action plan is primarily focusing on the city's wheelhouse and what we can act on. The fact that slide number 3 speaks to Hamilton's GHG emissions as being from the industry 7.3, right? And then transportation 1.5, buildings 1.4, industry emissions are approximately 5 times higher than the next group there. So how do we tackle the behemoth from a municipal framework? And is the hope that through the governance structures and having industry at the table that we are encouraging that industry change, or is there also an integration of our overarching climate goals and mission being integrated into our economic development strategies, and how we are actually having conversation not only with existing industry, but also in terms of how we're attracting future?
Director?
Through the chair, I'm hopeful it'll be both, because I think I just think about my outside of the city voice talking about industry, the climate elephant in the room, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this massive contribution, but sitting, within the municipality where the municipality doesn't necessarily have the direct sort of mandate to say, thou shalt not continue to emit greenhouse gases. So I think for us, and when I look at the existing Hamilton Climate Action Strategy, there are some good pieces in there. And I've mentioned already the Hamilton Regional Decarbonization Hub, and that idea of moving forward and thinking about those very much economic development related pieces, making sure we've got the skilled workforce to help with that transition towards a greener economy, the decarbonization side. How can we, as the city, where we have the opportunity to do so, push and promote and get those kinds of pieces in place so that we move away from this current scenario where industry is such a huge contributor. I will say too, just think about the green steel piece. And, a decade ago, I would have never imagined that we would be in the here and now talking about that shift happening now. So I'm hopeful, because I think and I hope that will start to lead to other shifts locally. And again, I think even in that case, it underscores in my mind that critical need for that space for different stakeholders to come around and have very focused conversations about what needs to happen to facilitate those shifts right to the endpoints that we know we want to see. Green steel production needs green hydrogen. We need to do a whole lot more collective work in the community to facilitate that happening on the ground, as one example, but there are many others too. So I hope that answers.
It does, yeah. And I appreciate it. It's a little bit, we as a committee and council have, realized that the only change we're going to be able to make is by advocating to the ministry, or saying that we're not in favor of air standard emissions being exempted for certain industry, and sending I would say a signal. But it gets frustrating, because as a municipality, at the end of the day, there's only the levers that we have the ability to pull versus, the standard by which industry really needs to be holding itself accountable towards future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Our next speaker is Councillor Craig Kassar.
It's so good to see you here, Lynda. Thank you. Through you, Deputy Mayor, there's been lots of conversation today and questions around communication and engagement in the community. And folks may or may not be aware of Catherine Hayhoe, who is a Canadian climate scientist out of Texas Tech, I believe. Basically, she's a climate champion, and she is, I would say, a role model for communicating on the topic of climate and engaging people and helping them understand, and particularly individuals or groups that don't think climate's a priority. There's one example in her book around Texas ranchers in Texas, I think, who are not the kind of people who would care about climate, and talks about things specifically and that are local to them and how the chain of events through climate change can happen. So I think that's important for those of us around the horseshoe here and in the community to look to role models like that. And I see you nodding your head. So my question was going to be, are you aware of her? Yes. So I think we don't have to reinvent everything. The knowledge is there. I think the methods are there. And I think accessing what's already out there is going to really help us. And because this communication piece is so important. So question asked and answered, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Much appreciated. Councillor Maureen Wilson, please.
Thank you, Chair. And on behalf of Ward 1, we're all just, again, so delighted to have you in this position and very fortunate. You mentioned carbon budgeting, and you acknowledge that you're not an expert, but I would surmise that you're far more advanced in your learnings on this than probably you'd like to portray. I'm wondering if you could speak to the distinction between that exercise, which I support, and sort of the adaptation mitigation measures that are more broad in scope. So it's raining considerably, which means runoff, which means contaminants, which means flooding. And I'm wondering if you could speak to a climate budget and maybe carbon budgeting within that context. Is there a distinction in your mind, or are they complementary? Thank you, through the chair.
Yeah. Director, please.
Through the chair. That's a good question, and I don't know if I can fully and effectively answer it, other than to say I would hope once we get to the point where we're routinely using a carbon budget, it's going to influence decision making and what the city opts to do. And I think probably in most contexts, fair to say that decisions that are going to lead to increase in greenhouse gas emissions are decisions that are going to amplify or exacerbate some of those other problems that you described. So I think I would hope that paying attention on the budgeting side is going to reinforce, and maybe sometimes the links will be very direct, maybe sometimes less so. I don't know how else to respond beyond that. Yeah, I think once we get rolling with the carbon budget, it may become clearer how those two are connected. Mm-hmm. But you're right, some of it is more, when you think about some of the examples that you've thrown out there, the adaptation piece maybe is a little bit tougher to directly link to the carbon budgeting process, even though we've got to adapt as a result of
resiliency.
Yeah.
Councillor?
Thank you. I have some questions for the city manager when it comes to the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Esther Pauls, please.
Thank you. And thank you, Lynda, for helping us try to understand and navigate all this. But I heard you say about carbon budget. And as soon as you said that, I thought about my household budget, because you did say it's just like a household budget. And when I carefully look at my budget, I cut things that maybe I can do without, or I sacrifice other things so that my budget is in line in what I can pay. My question is, what does the carbon budget looks like to you? Does it look like we need to raise taxes? And we just finished our 2023 tax, and I had a lot of people upset that they cannot afford to live in their homes. They're not afford putting food on their table because of this budget. I just want to ask you if you could unfold what kind of sacrifice do we need to do in order to look at this carbon budget. I don't really understand, because honestly, even today, people were upset that I voted for the budget. But as you know, the budget had quite a bit on climate change initiatives, like your office and the other office that we're trying to do. So just please unpack that for me.
Thank you. Director, please.
Through the chair. Thanks for the question, Councillor Pauls. So maybe that household budget analogy doesn't work so well when it comes to maybe the austerity side of things, because what I would say to you is that I think the more success that we have reducing those greenhouse gas emissions, so shrinking the budget, the more benefits we'll actually see in the community. And I think it's also fair to say the more quickly we're able to do that, I would say from an economic point of view, from a taxpayer impact, the better shape we'll be in. Because I think if we understand anything, it's that climate impacts are costly. And when communities figure out ways to move quickly to start to head in the right direction to mitigate those impacts, the better off we are from a financial point of view. While at the same time, I think fair to say across the board that we realize enhanced quality of life in our communities from doing all the things that we need to do to tackle the climate crisis. So thanks for asking the question that way, because I think it's got me feeling like maybe we need a slightly different analogy to explain that to people.
Exactly, because I think, thank you, through the chair, because I did hear you say it's like looking at your household budget, and that's what triggered this. So I appreciate your answer. You did say that in the long run, it's best. And in your opinion, I mean, you know way more than I do on climate. How many years would it take for us to see a difference when we put all this on the table, when we do all these things? How many years down the road?
Director?
Through the chair. That's an interesting question. I guess it depends on the initiative that we're talking about. So urban greening, I mean, we can get cracking now and we'll start to see impacts unfolding, this year even. We could do things that'll establish more green in locations in the city that need that green. And obviously over time, green continues to grow, so we'll see those benefits build over time with that kind of an approach. I think sometimes, and I wonder whether this is partly where your question is coming from. It all seems kind of abstract when we talk about having to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. What does that mean? If we get to our targets, how is that going to change the way things look around us? If you're just thinking about those numbers, I think that makes it a little bit more difficult. So you sort of have to think about it in terms of, and maybe a good way to wrap your head around it is take a look at their charts in both of our plans that are part of the climate action strategy that spell out, here are all the things that we need to do, here are all the actions that we need to take. And I always find that really useful, and they're actually categorized based effectively on short, medium, and long term, so you can see what's being recommended in the plan really to help us to get moving. And the actions, I think, are really what help to visualize how our community is going to start to look different over time, and how those sort of positive benefits of climate action are going to start to emerge. So I hope that helps a little bit to respond to your question.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just have one, it's really interesting. Somebody said to me, we're really not an island to ourselves. What we do, the whole world needs to do this. It's not just Hamilton, and we're putting a lot of burden on Hamilton. Hamilton does this, we'll change the world. I've been to Haiti many times, and I'll tell you, if you were to go there, your hair would stand up. All the, not only garbage and all that, but how they cook, how they cut trees, all that. And so someone asked me, what would the change mean if Hamilton does it and the rest, our neighbors, doesn't do it? What change? And then I heard somebody, we need to do it between now and
look in Ontario, other municipalities are moving like we are to do what needs to be done. And I think there's also a global acknowledgement that wealthier nations, and that would translate down into wealthier cities, have an obligation to act. And on a global scale, I think it's very fair to say that Hamilton is a wealthy community, comparatively speaking. You've used Haiti as an example where we need to act because our contribution to the problem has been that much greater. And then we also need to think about, on that nation-to-nation level, what kinds of supports need to be in place to help, sort of like taking our climate justice principles that we really want to figure out how to apply effectively on the local level and applying them on a global level, so no one is left behind as we move forward trying to figure out or understand what. I think we know what we need to do. Now it's a matter of let's get cracking and we need to take that action. So I hope that answers your question on that front.
Well, yes, it does. And through the chair again, I've been, people have been saying, the people that think, climate change it's so urgent are taking jets to talk about climate change. So there's some criticism in that. And it's so much harder. It's so much harder to explain to people the urgency because they see sometimes, the higher ups not really heeding to their own advice, and that hurts everyone. It hurts us. It hurts the marginalized because we're trying our best. We're doing our sacrifices, and the ones that are proclaiming are not. So these are the questions people ask me. These are the questions people want to know. And they want to know if this is going to increase our taxes to 8, 9, 10%, maybe we should look at it again. So thank you for your time. And I'm looking forward to sitting down with you and talking about these things that really matter to people. Thanks.
Yeah, through the chair, maybe quickly, Councillor Pauls, we would be happy to sit down and talk with you, and maybe there's information that we could share with you that you can share with constituents just to help you to communicate to them why this is so important and the benefits that it's going to bring to the community longer term.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to it.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Pauls is our last questioner. I need a mover and a seconder to receive the presentation. Thank you very much, Director, for your work today. Councillor Cassar is moving it. Councillor Matt Francis is seconding it. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, let's call the vote on this item, please. The vote is up. On the presentation only. And if you can put Councillor Maureen Wilson on the list for speakers on the report. And we have to rejig the screen because there we go. Thank you very much. So that vote carried 14-0. Now we're on the main report. Councillor Maureen Wilson, you're up to ask a question of staff that you indicated earlier.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the City Manager, there was reference earlier in some of the questions and comments about the need for the organization, as on any initiative, to work collaboratively across silos, to work with purpose and intent, and pivoting also to Councillor Cassar's insightful comment about how to speak to people's self-interest. You would not think ranchers in Texas would be advocates of climate change, but identifying that the next generation of ranchers will probably be for naught in given the impacts of climate on that lifestyle and that industry. So my question to you is, to facilitate this corporate effort and to assist myself in understanding everything from, the annual algae blooms and how those are directly a consequence of warming temperatures, that there are implications for inaction and action. Has there been any thought been given to the change in how reports are written for this body, such that there's a clear account of whether or not it facilitates, accounts for the climate impact, facilitates for us meeting our climate objectives, just some accountability to speak to those different self-interests and that cause and effect. Please and thank you. And the cost of not acting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. City Manager Smith, please.
Through the chair. It's an interesting question, and we've started having conversations at the senior leadership team about our council report template because we feel it needs to evolve. So the current one, just lists, this is consistent with our strat plan, just lists a bunch. Didn't really say anything. So a few things. When we have your new term of council priorities, then I'd like to look at how the council report template really facilitates seeing how whatever the report's coming forward really drives the outcomes that we're looking in that one. We've started to have a discussion around climate change about, is it that triple bottom line that there's a piece in the report that talks about climate change, social, environment, I never get the three off the top of my head correct, that's something we put in. As we advance our public engagement framework, we do not consistently, for example, report back on how we've done public engagement and how we've incorporated what we've heard. So I think our council report template needs to evolve to capture your specific question because I don't want to prejudge what your priorities are, but around climate change. But I think there's some other pieces as well so that you have better, consistent information in each of the reports to make informed decisions. I know I broadened it into broader, but those are some of the thinkings we're having right now at this stage.
Councillor?
Thank you, Chair. So I'm sure as Chair, you may interpret my next question as a bit cheeky. It's not supposed to be. It is intentional. Through the Chair to the City Manager, during your tenure here, has there been a report that's come across your desk in which the sentence reads that Subject A represents a threat to humanity? A lack of a parking space, a failing playground equipment. Has there been a report which you have signed off on as the City Manager that states explicitly that inaction or this predicament, this reality facing this city, this planet, presents a threat to humanity?
City Manager.
It's been a long 4 years. I would say that in earlier climate change reports, when Trevor Imhoff was our one single lone person, he certainly had flagged that in his. And certainly this one, nothing else is coming off the top of my head.
Councillor?
So respectfully, through the Chair, I appreciate that you're in service to this body and that this body has to yet deliberate on its priorities. But I would provide the greatest encouragement, and whether that is in the form of a direction or not, that the reporting to this body has to change, and that there is no other matter during your tenure which has framed it. The climate emergency is arguably the greatest existential threat facing humanity. And we must account for our actions, whether we are exacerbating, contributing, mitigating, or providing for greater resiliency in this community. So I will leave that with you. If a member of this body would wish to move as such, I'd be happy to stand by, but I don't want to dip into operational matters. But I do think it is that fundamental that we be held accountable for our actions and whether we are addressing this or not? Thank you.
So I'm taking that what you're asking is that the report would have some type of indication as to whether or not we are compliant with the strategy that we've approved as our priorities, including climate change, things along that line. Is that what the intent is?
Thank you, Chair, for asking me that. My intent would in the report would be just a little background. When I first moved to Hamilton, I was responsible for training the entire regional corporation on sustainable development and Vision 2020. And in those reports, we had to account whether the action assisted in its impact on the three-legged stool. And it soon became apparent, not dishing dirt, but any report could be massaged to say it offered us a balance, when we knew that was not the case. I'm asking the city manager, and I can do so in a direction for a report to this body and this community, because it will take this community to provide for a clear account on whether it, how the recommendation in a report addresses climate change. That's what I'm asking.
Thank you. Councillor Nan? Your microphone, Councillor.
Oh,
sorry.
Thank you, through you, Deputy Mayor. It's I think on the same topic. I wasn't going to say anything else on the report until City Manager provided the response to Councillor Wilson's question. And I think that one of the things that I would offer in this discussion on the table right now is that it's beyond council terms of priority. I think that it is now integrated into the city, period. It is embedded within the city's framework of work moving forward. And same with, I would say, the same is to be said about equity, diversity, and inclusion. And from my perspective, it would be really important to just enable that embedding process to take place so that we are very clear as a group of governors how the work that our good staff are doing is advancing us in progress towards those two frames. In earlier terms of council, Deputy Mayor, we talked about how to embed a climate lens and equity lens into every function of the city, including the budget. And it's still something that we're figuring out how to tease out when reports come back to council and we're deliberating over them. That aspect of clarity, I think, is also about public accountability in terms of how much we are progressing and advancing given the work that our staff are doing on a day-to-day basis. And I think that I would be, if direction is needed, be happy to provide it. Although I recognize that SLT is engaged in those discussions right now. I guess to you, Deputy Mayor, what would be most helpful right now?
Well, I don't think we should try to draft that motion on the fly here.
Got it.
So perhaps the city manager and yourselves can have a chat and see if you can come up with something that this body could consider. But I think it's a valuable exercise, so let's see what we can come up with. Any further speakers on this item? Seeing none, Councillor Alex Wilson.
Just a hopefully very quick question. This report talks about all the things that we're doing that are new, that are happening through the Office of Climate Change Initiatives, but it also makes reference to all the things ongoing in existing work plans. Where can we see those 2023 work plans and how climate objectives are highlighted? I think this is foundational to the conversation we were just having. Even if we just get a sense of what's on the work plan in various departments, that'd be helpful through you, Chair, to maybe the city manager.
City manager, General Manager Thorne, you almost got a promotion.
Yeah, so through the chair, at the moment, you'd be referring back to the climate change strategy itself Each of the different operating divisions do have their different work plans that come forward through budget time. I will say there's not a great one-stop shop at the moment, and that was one of the pieces why Lynda had that as one of the priorities in terms of what is that format going to look like for annual reporting. The first annual report after the adoption of the climate change strategy will be this year. We're looking at October. I'm not going to promise we're going to get it perfect right out of the gates, but that's what we're hoping will start to be that one-stop shop in terms of what we are working on, what the priorities are. It may take one or two iterations of that over time to get it perfectly correct. But I think one of the things we identified is there's not a perfect one-stop shop where you can say, here's every climate change that's being worked on. And it's quite a challenge because it is such a massive undertaking that there's work happening all over the corporation. And that's by design and that's by intention that, as much as you've heard from the Office of Climate Change Initiatives today, the climate change strategy is an all-of-city strategy. And so there's action happening everywhere. So that is one of the reasons we put that up there as a priority, is how do we kind of figure out this council and community reporting so it can kind of be holistic. We just aren't there yet.
Councillor.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, as the behind the scenes work is happening for the forthcoming annual report, would it be possible to get a departmental summary of the 2023 work plan? Because the climate action strategy sets goals to 2050. So knowing what departments are taking on in year one or in year two would be very helpful, not necessarily asking for an advanced timeline of the work that's already going, but much like an OBL tracker or an OBL update email. Could we get those departmental summaries when that work is already happening as part of the OCCI's work plan? So not duplicating work, but just including council in it.
And GM Thorne.
So through the chair, my preference, because I'd rather not do the work twice, and that is exactly what we're trying to line up for October, and I'd like to kind of stick to that deadline as well. We'll try to have something that's a bit more of a comprehensive package in front of you, rather than trying to get all the divisions and departments to do an interim and then ask them again a few weeks later to do something for our annual report. I would say in developing what that reporting framework is going to look like, we are hopeful that we'll have that advisory committee in place, and I would think that's probably one of the things we're going to want to put very early on the list of asks to them, is to help give us some feedback in terms of what the community is going to be looking for in terms of what that reporting framework looks like.
Councillor.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, I think it's fundamental that we as folks around this horseshoe not just understand the broad strokes of where we're going, who some of the faces are leading the way, but also what is the nitty-gritty work that's happening and the order that it's happening, understanding that we are building capacity, and that takes time. I don't mean that as like a critical comment, but I also mean to say that if a resident asks me, what is Public Works doing for climate change right now? I could make a lot of guesses. I could make a lot of very informed, direct comments like, well, we're doing things in green infrastructure, we're doing things over here, but I can't give that specific answer. And I just wanted to check in and kind of frame that back to SLT, that that's the level that this council is working with, especially 10 new faces.
Appreciate that clarification, and actually drawing it back into Lynda's presentation around that sort of that communication strategy. That is exactly some of the things that we're looking at doing, is what are some of those things we can be reporting out now that are happening. It may not be exhaustive of every single thing that's happening, because we're hearing some of the same questions. What are some examples of some of the things that the city is doing right now? So yes, in the sort of the very short term, you can certainly expect to see more of that. And Lynda's been working with all of the different departments to kind of collect some of that information. It won't be an exhaustive report in the next few weeks. For that, I hopefully you can give us the time to get to October before we do something a little bit more comprehensive.
Thanks to the chair. Just wanted to pass on where we have and the information we have right now, understanding that we're at the beginning of this work, and what we have right now will not be what we have a year from now. So I do appreciate that.
Thank you. Councillor Jackson, can you take the chair for a second?
Floor is yours, Deputy Mayor.
So I listened intently to this report, and it again raised the existential threat that climate change is having, and we have an obligation, I would say, not just a responsibility, but an obligation to ensure that we're not adding to that crisis by minimizing our greenhouse gas emissions, which is what Dr. Lukasik is here to assist us in doing going forward. And the key there is going forward. We are already internationally experiencing the impacts of climate change. Africa this year will have the highest temperature they have ever had in their lives, and they're in the middle of a major drought. The monsoons in India have never been so vicious. The water has just swept away villages. In Canada, we're seeing snowfalls and rainfall events that are unbelievable. And while tornadoes are not common in Ontario, we are seeing, it almost seems like the winds are competing with themselves. I can go one step higher. You know, we used to see 60, 70 kilometer an hour wind gusts. Now we're getting 90 and 100 kilometer an hour wind gusts. And so all of these things are happening. And so my question is, are we ready today for the impacts of climate change that are going to hit us? Are we ready to help our residents who do not have air conditioning when the temperatures exceed the 45-degree mark, which is quite likely? Do we have are we ready with our emergency operations center to handle major wind events that can really damage large swaths of the city of Hamilton, not just a few neighborhoods here and there? We're seeing it all around us, and we've been relatively fortunate. We've had a couple of events that were really significant, but we're talking about the future, how we can help lower our greenhouse gas emissions, Chair. But realistically, we're already facing these challenges, and I'm not sure the City of Hamilton has plans or is ready for it. So I would like to hear comments from the City Manager. How would we handle some of these major events that do so much damage in other municipalities, in other states, in other countries?
Through the chair, I'm going to start, and then I'll ask a couple of GMs to give concrete examples. So if I step back and look at our Emergency Operations Center in terms of reacting, we certainly have had a lot of experience over the last few years with the pandemic of how to operationalize it. We do training. We've done some weather-related exercise in the past. So I think from an EOC and pulling it together, we're in good shape. We know our roles, we've got backups, people are trained, etc. We've had good experiences because often these are localized of partnerships with other municipalities where we've gone and helped them, and reciprocal agreements that they would come help us. So say it's an ice storm, we need extra help with trees, etc. We've helped Ottawa in the past, and so we have all those things in place. If I look at our infrastructure, is it ready? Certainly our asset management work that's being done right now with Director Leishman, climate change is a huge lens being looked at in terms of reviewing all our assets and where investments we have to make. I'll ask General Manager Kan if he just wants to speak a little more about public works and some of the preparations and things that they're doing, from whether it's our water and wastewater infrastructure or shoreline, etc., as one example, and then I'll come back.
Thank you, City Manager. General Manager Kan, please.
Through the chair to the committee, Carlisle Kan, General Manager of Public Works. Within Public Works, we are starting to look at what we call design standards with regards to resiliency and how do we respond to emergencies. The city manager, she pointed out, we're actively members of the EOC Response Center. We look at the type of events that could happen that are related to climate and weather events. What we are seeing is more of these events, and the intensity of these events are going up. So our design standards with regards to flooding, we may go from a 100-year storm to a 150-year storm 200-year storm. And what that means is the amount of rainfall that would happen during that event, the intensity has been impacted by the climate, so therefore our design standards are changing. We're also working through the Regional Public Works Commissioners of Ontario. We have a subcommittee there where we're working with other municipalities to figure out what that standard should be and what it should look like. And we're working across Ontario to make sure that those standards are what we start to design for. I think when you talk about resilience is how well do we, I guess, survive these events and then live through it. And we look at storm events, we look at wind loading, we look at how we design our buildings, green roof systems, finishes, concrete finishes versus paved finishes versus water absorbent finishes that is allows the water to percolate down into the ground as opposed to just running off. So these are all things that we're looking at, and through Jason's report that you saw in the fall, he had a list in Appendix E of all the different things that we're doing. So we're starting to action each of those items and build it into our design. And we challenge ourselves as we look forward. If we had to build a facility, is it your typical concrete steel structure? Maybe we should be shifting to a low carbon structure, heavy timber type of structure. What's the delta in terms of the design costs? What's the delta in terms of emissions? And how does that help us get to our targets as we move forward? So I think it's happening across the spectrum. Can we put our finger on it? Through the report in the fall, we will identify areas that we will be participating in, but it is a massive shift that we're part of, and we're starting to look at these more and more. And we're looking at today's standards as the baseline, so we can come back to council and committee and say this is the incremental cost of designing to 150-year storm water. And just to maybe underscore the point, the flooding and drainage master plan, we're looking at that too, not based on standards that were 40 years ago, but future standards and rain intensities and the type of events that we think will be occurring.
Thank you, General Manager Kent. City Manager, you want to do a wrap on this, please?
Well, I'd like to come back on the stream about what are we doing for our most vulnerable that are more impacted, again, from heat experiences or cold. And so I do know, and General Manager Burden's on if she wants to add, is Public Health taking a review of our heat alert system and what we have in place. And I would ask her to talk about kind of that stream. And you also heard Trevor Imhoff, the Senior Project Manager, talk about the vulnerable response program. So they're working on that. But if General Manager Burden could add in about the heat alert.
Thank you, City Manager. General Manager Burden.
Thank you. Angie Burden, General Manager of Healthy and Safe Communities. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillors. So the City Manager is correct. We have been meeting with Public Health, taking a coordinating and communication lead in the extreme heat and the heat wave planning. The last meeting that the group had was just on Friday of this past week, and it includes representatives from Public Works, from Ontario Works, from Housing, Climate Change, Public Health, MLE, Parks. I'm going to miss some, but there is a report underway that will be coming forward in May to advise Council of the approach as well as the service levels that are provided, whether it's cooling centers or different incentives that various divisions are able to provide. And Council will have that information through that report and an opportunity for dedicated discussion at that time.
Thank you, General Manager. Councillor, you still have the floor.
Thank you. And I'll just wrap up with my gratitude. I asked the question not to be critical of staff, but to acknowledge that while we're talking about the existential threat down the road, it's already happening now. We're already feeling these impacts, and the most vulnerable of our citizens feel them the most. And so we need to be trying to mitigate those impacts of what climate change is doing and what it possibly can do. So I'm glad that it's under consideration and that you're working on that. I'm pleased to hear that. I'll take
Cheers
the chair
back to you,
back.
Councillor.
Thank you very much. Any further questions on this report then? Seeing none, we'll have the vote. I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Danko, seconded by Councillor Francis. And this is to approve the report. The vote is up, councillors. Oops. Sorry, Angela, I didn't hit submit. And the vote carried 12-0.